Welcome to our fifth session of Secrets of the Mahatma Letters to A.P. Sinnett. I'm Paul, and this is Terry, and welcome back. This is number 5, Terry.
Yes.
Let's dive in.
Number 5. All right. Recapitulating just a little bit about where we left off in our last session, K.H., the Mahatma, had been to visit the Mahachohan, the supervisor of all the adepts, who apparently, from the description, was at the time somewhere probably in what is now Pakistan, because he had left Tibet, traveled across northern India, and parts of Pakistan were at that time India. It was still India, but it was possibly somewhere near Lahore. So he had just returned from there and was on his way back home. And as he said, he was traveling through the Karakoram Mountains and down one of the narrow valley passageways when an avalanche occurred. And so once the avalanche subsided, he was contemplating the immense stillness that happens after an event like that. And just as he was contemplating this powerful natural event and the stillness that came after it, he heard over the Mahatmic internet,
Mahatmic broadcast channel,
the shrill cry of HPB, which was as shrill as Saraswati's peacock. She's, remember, the goddess of knowledge and is often depicted as riding on a peacock. And the peacock cry is so shrill that it would frighten the king of the Nagas, the king of the serpents, probably cobras. Anyway, she was shouting to Kuthumi, "Occult has raised the very devil again. The Englishmen are going crazy. Kuthumi, come quicker and help me. I must say that the old lady's telegrams do strike one like stones from a catapult." So here he has been in seclusion for a long period of time, and because of her distress, he decides to do something that is completely out of the norm. Why don't you pick up the letter from there?
What could I do but come? Argument through space with one who was in cold despair and in a state of moral chaos was useless. So I determined to emerge from a seclusion of many years and spend some time with her to comfort her as well as I could. But our friend is not one to cause her mind to reflect the philosophical resignation of Marcus Aurelius. I had come for a few days, but now find that I myself cannot endure for any length of time the stifling magnetism even of my own countrymen. I turn my face homeward tomorrow.
So some of the things he mentioned, because we have an much edited version of the letters for our presentation. So a couple of the things he mentioned was that he saw some of their proud old Sikhs drunk, stumbling across the marble steps of their temple. And in another case, he saw one of their own people preaching against theosophy and against Raja Yoga, saying that science had come to rescue them from their superstitions. So he wasn't too happy with his own countrymen either.
I have telegraphed you my thanks for your obliging compliance with my wishes in the matters you allude to in your letter of the 24th
instantemente. So for those of you who like to read the letters in their original form, he sometimes uses Latin phrases and phrases from other languages as well, French quite often. And it was a typical usage in English in those days to, especially in letters, say the 14th INST, meaning of the current month, instantemente. And sometimes I'll say 24th ultimo mense, which is last month.
Received at Umritsur on the 27th instante mense at 2 p.m. I got your letter about 30 miles beyond Raoul Pindi 5 minutes later and had an acknowledgement wired to you from the Jhelum at 4 p.m. on the same afternoon. Our modes of accelerated delivery and quick communications are not then, as you will see, to be despised by the Western world.
Now, we're going to see in the next, well, not the next letter, but in a few letters, what he's referring to. He's kind of setting up a scene here that won't be resolved right away, but a few weeks later it will be resolved. So KH is traveling by train. He doesn't mention it, but he wrote from Amritsar, which is right next to Lahore, and Jhelum is not far beyond that. So he had received a letter from Sinnett via HPB while he was in the train. So he received it in the train. He stopped at the next stop and sent a telegram. So that's why he said,
our modes of accelerated delivery?
Yes, their modes of accelerated delivery. So they had a form of telecommunication that was better than email today.
I could not ask a more judicial frame of mind in an ally than that in which you are beginning to find yourself. My brother, you have already changed your attitude towards us in a distinct degree.
Now, we're beginning to see here a real friendship and affection developing on the part of KH for, at least for Sinnett. He's kind of taking a personal interest in him, not just as a conduit, but personally as well.
What is to prevent a perfect mutual understanding one day? Mr. Hume's proposition has been duly and carefully considered. He will, no doubt, advise you of the results as expressed in my letter to him. Whether he will give our modes of action as fair a trial as yourself is another question. Our Maha, the chief, or Mahachohan, has allowed me to correspond with both of you, and even, in case of an Anglo-Indian branch is formed, to come someday in personal contact with it.
That's pretty big.
That's huge. The Mahachohan, let's share who that is.
So the adepts, the ones that we're talking about, the Mahatmas, are at a certain level of enlightenment and are part of the hierarchy, the spiritual hierarchy of our planet. Above them are what they call Chohans, which in English would correspond to the title of a lord. And the Mahachohan is one level yet beyond that. So he's the chief of the Chohans and the Adepts.
And he's been granted.
He's granted permission. That's who KH went to visit near Lahore in order to present this proposition and to hopefully get his approval. And he did give a conditional approval.
Conditional, and this relates to the entire correspondence, the approval to do this whole exercise,
and to potentially start a new branch, the Anglo-Indian branch.
It now depends entirely on you. I cannot tell you more. Quite apart from the unlucky incidents of the Bombay publications, it is not possible that there should be much more at best than a benevolent neutrality shown by your people toward ours. There is so very minute a point of contact between the two civilizations they respectively represent that one might almost say they could not touch at all.
Now, here he's going to contrast his interactions with Alcott and what he expects could be the interactions with the two Englishmen. And obviously, Sinnett has referred to Alcott in his letter because K.H. says, Colonel Alcott is doubtless out of time with the feelings of the English people, of both classes, but nevertheless more in time with us than either. Him we can trust under all circumstances, and his faithful service is pledged to us come well, come ill. Where can we find an equal devotion? He is one who never questions but obeys, who may make innumerable mistakes out of excessive zeal, but never is unwilling to repair his fault, even at the cost of the greatest self-humiliation. So, lack of ego. Who esteems the sacrifice of comfort and even life something to be cheerfully risked whenever necessary. Who will eat any food or even go without, sleep on any bed, work in any place, fraternize with any outcast, endure any privation for the cause. So this is in contrast to
the Englishmen.
The two Englishmen.
Let's remind our viewers what he's talking about here. Colonel Alcott is one of the other founders of the Theosophical Society, along with Blavatsky. But these letters, so the masters, have they been in direct communication with Alcott?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
for quite a while. Remember, the original messages, notes that Alcott was receiving was from members of the Egyptian Brotherhood. And then at some point it switched over to the Tibetan Brotherhood.
At this point, where is Alcott? Is he with HPB still?
Yes.
This was November of 1880, letter number 5.
So I'm assuming they're at Bombay, but I'm not sure.
And just one more point of clarification.
Actually, they are still staying with Sinnett at this point.
Okay. One more point so we can have more I and we can have more context. Why is KH contrasting the behavior of Alcott versus the Englishman? Is to illustrate a point, I'm sure, but
yeah, he's pointing out that Alcott deserves all of this, the communications and everything. So far, Sinnett and Hume have done basically nothing.
And the master is basically putting Sinnett on notice that, hey, Alcott is a pupil of ours and he is working in conjunction with us.
Exactly. And he is willing to give up whatever, do whatever it takes. He is completely and totally dedicated to the cause.
These flowers smell
so
good.
He goes on to say that, referring to Alcott, he will have no more to do with it than he has with the London branch, because remember, the whole premise was we don't want to have to deal with Alcott or HPB. We want direct communication. Let's get those two out of the way, and it'll just be us people. And then so he says there will be no more interference with your operations than he has with the London branch. The London branch was operating pretty much independently, and even today there's still a large degree of independence throughout Europe and in Canada. Then he says, think well before you ask our guidance. And then he says, our best, most learned, and holiest adepts are of the races of the greasy Tibetans. So I don't know if Sinnett referred to greasy Tibetans in his letter, but he put that in quotes.
There's got to be a reason why he said that.
Our best, most learned and holiest adepts are of the races of the greasy Tibetans and the Punjabi Singhs. Now the Singhs, we often refer to them today as Sikhs. So it's a group of Hindus from the Punjab who are kind of an ethnic group. And obviously KH, that is his family. They were Punjabi Singhs or Sikhs.
And now Singh is a very popular, common last name.
And that's why he signs his name Kuthumi Lal Singh. You know, the lion is proverbially a dirty and offensive beast. So Singh in Hindi and in Sanskrit means lion. And it refers to the fact that they are very courageous, lion-hearted. And so they take on this name lion as an adjective to describe themselves. The lion is proverbially a dirty and offensive beast despite his strength and courage. All right, why don't you pick up from there?
My good brother, are you certain that the pleasant impression you now may have from our correspondence would not instantly be destroyed upon seeing me? An instance. I desired Madame Blavatsky to select among the 2 or 3 Aryan Punjabis who study Yoga Vidya and are natural mystics, one whom, without disclosing myself to him too much, I could designate as an agent between yourself and us, and whom I was anxious to dispatch to you with a letter of introduction and have him speak to you of yoga and its practical effects. This young gentleman, who is as pure as purity itself, whose aspirations and thoughts are of the most spiritual, ennobling kind, and who merely through self-exertion is able to penetrate into the regions of the formless worlds. Wow. This young man is not fit for a drawing room. Who's he speaking about?
Is he what?
Who's he speaking about?
It's no one that we know, but it's
not Damodar.
No, it's a chela that is a pupil of theirs.
Okay.
And he's obviously quite advanced,
right?
Because he's got some degree of siddhis.
Sure.
But go ahead and continue.
Madame Blavatsky asked him in guarded and very delicate terms to change his dress and turban before starting for Allahabad. For, though she did not give him this reason, they were very dirty and slovenly.
So when we talk about purity, obviously it doesn't mean you have to have the cleanest clothes and the cleanest environment. It's inside.
It's internal. You are to tell Mr. Sinnett, she said, that you bring him a letter from our brother K, which is Kuthumi, with whom he corresponds. But if he asks you anything, either of him or the other brothers, answer him simply and truthfully that you are not allowed to expound upon the subject. Speak of yoga and prove to him what powers you have attained. This young man, who had consented, wrote later on the following curious letter. Oh, sorry. This young man who had consented wrote later on the following curious letter. Madam, he said, you who preach the highest standard of morality, of truthfulness, etc., you would have me play the part of an impostor. You ask me to change my clothes at the risk of giving a false idea of my personality and mystifying the gentleman you send me to. And what if he asks me if I personally know Kuthumi? Am I to keep silent and allow him to think I do? This would be a tacit falsehood. And guilty of that, I would be thrown back into the awful whirl of transmigration.
So, KH, the Mahatma, has a conundrum, a problem here on 2 hands. First, he's got Sinnett and Hume who are so buttoned up and everything has to be just so. And so he is wanting to send this highly advanced chela to teach them, to convince them that it is possible to achieve what they're trying to achieve, but he's filthy. And so in his desire to be very careful, he suggested to HPB, can you just kind of suggest that maybe he could change his turban and his outfit? And he took offense at that. He said, you who preach the highest morality want me to pretend to be something that I am not. And what am I supposed to do if they ask me certain questions? So, and then the strangest part of it is, I'm afraid that if I lie, that I'll be thrust back into the realm of transmigration.
Wow.
So some of their highest chelas still believe in transmigration, which is not a theosophical concept, meaning going back into the into the animal kingdom, reincarnating in the animal kingdom.
Into a rat or to a cockroach or something that's a lower form of biology.
Many of the most advanced yogis or aspirants still eat meat. The Tibetan monks eat meat. Mahatma Maurya smoked a pipe. So it shows us that Sinnett and Hume, who were smokers and drinkers and meat eaters, still had the opportunity to make a certain amount of advancement, regardless of that. Because once again, purity is not outward, it's inward. The one thing that, to progress too far, is the one deal breaker is alcohol.
And drugs, alcohol and drugs.
Right, any mind-altering substance.
Would caffeine play a part in that?
No.
Be included? No?
No. Better not be.
Yeah.
But, and the reason is because anything that alters the mind makes it impossible to work with that individual for the time being.
It's an additional veil, it's cloudiness, it's the opposite of clarity.
Exactly. Yeah. So our whole goal is to be completely clear at all times, and that takes a lot of practice to do.
When we speak of the advancement of consciousness, or expansion rather of our consciousness, it would stand to reason that alcohol and drugs, it's the opposite of that. Instead of expanding consciousness, it's constricting it or dulls it.
Yeah.
Here's an illustration of the difficulties under which we have to labor. Powerless to send to you a neophyte before you have pledged yourself to us. We have to either keep back or dispatch to you one who at best would shock, if not inspire you at once with disgust. The letter would have been given him by my own hand. He had but to promise to hold his tongue upon matters he knows nothing about and could give but a false idea of, and to make himself look cleaner. Prejudice and dead letter again.
I'm not quite sure what dead letter means. I guess it means end of the line, like the dead letter office at the post office is for letters that have been they've tried to deliver and the address was wrong, or for whatever reason it came to them and couldn't go any further because they didn't have a way to return it and they had no way to deliver it.
Dead letter. But these, our difficulties, ought not to prevent you from beginning your work. We are content that the trial shall be made. Suppose you draft a memorandum as to the constitution and policy of management of the Anglo-Indian Society you have in mind and submit it for consideration. If our chiefs agree to it, then you will at once be chartered, but they must first see the plan. This is the first practical suggestion coming from a cis and trans-Himalayan cave dweller whom you have honored with your confidence. He's calling himself a cave dweller.
I'm not sure if Sinnett made some kind of reference to cave dweller, but
I'm sure
he's
did.
being sarcastic.
Of course.
because what he means by cis and trans Himalayan means that he operates both on the Indian side of the Himalayas and on the Tibetan side. So both sides, he commutes back and forth. And a cave dweller is a joke because some of the yogis actually do live in caves.
Mm-hmm. What's it, cis?
Cis means same side.
Okay.
Trans means opposite side.
And now about yourself personally. Far be it from me to discourage one so willing as yourself by setting up impossible barriers to your progress. We never whine over the inevitable, but try to make the best of the worst. We are ever ready to assist those who come to us. It is true that the married man cannot be an adept, yet without striving to become a Raja Yogi, he can acquire certain powers and do as much good to mankind and often more by remaining within the precincts of this world of his. Therefore, we shall not ask you to precipitately. Therefore, we shall not ask you to precipitately change fixed habits of life before the full conviction of its necessity and advantage has possessed you. There are more ways than one for acquiring occult knowledge. There is a tone of complaint in your question, whether there ever will be a renewal of the vision you had the night before the picnic.
Remember that the night before the picnic, when his wife's brooch appeared in the cushion, K.H. had tried to appear to him in a dream.
Right.
And it was only partially successful. And Sinnett was still kind of obsessing about that.
It would be a waste of our strength. As often as I or any of us can communicate with you, whether by dreams, waking impressions, letters, in or out of pillows, or personal visits in astral form, it will be done. But remember that Shimla is 7,000 feet higher than Allahabad, and the difficulties to be surmounted at the latter are tremendous. The term universal brotherhood is no idle phrase. Humanity in the mass has a paramount claim upon us, as I try to explain in my letter to Mr. Hume, which you had better ask the loan of. It is the only secure foundation for universal morality. If it be a dream, it is at least a noble one for mankind, and it is the aspiration of the true adept. Yours faithfully, Kuthumi Lal Singh.
So in that letter, the Mahatma said, you better ask Hume to let you see the letter that I wrote to him. So he had written pretty much about the same time, but he apparently had written to Hume first and then to Sinnett. So they each received separate letters. And now we're going to take a look at the letter that was written to Hume. Now, we don't have the original of this one because remember, Hume threw all of his letters away or they disappeared. We don't have any of the original Mahatma letters that were written to Hume. But when Sinnett got that letter to read, he also made a copy of it. So that's what we have.
Wonderful.
So this also came from Amritsar.
This letter
he spells it differently here. So it's
Amritsar.
always a transliteration of another language. So it's pronounced so it could be or am, however
Amritsar.
they want to.
This is letter 6, right?
It's not numbered because it's inserted. It's not one of them two. It's not one of the ones in the original Mahatma letters.
This was received, as Terry said, in Amritsar, November 1st.
It was written from Amritsar on the November 1st.
Written from Amritsar, November 1st, 1880. Dear Sir, availing of the first moments of leisure to formally answer your letter of the 17th ultimo, there we go again, I will now report the result of my conference with our chiefs upon the proposition therein contained, trying at the same time to answer all your questions. I am to thank you on behalf of the whole section of our fraternity that is especially interested in the welfare of India for an offer of help whose importance and sincerity no one can doubt. We have a love for our motherland so deep and passionate that it has survived even the broadening and cosmopolitanizing.
Cosmopolitanization.
It says cosmopolitanizing there. But yeah, ization might sound better.
So what we see here is that KH speaks English well enough that he knows that you can take one word and make another form out of it. So cosmopolitan being an adjective, he can turn it into a noun.
Or a noun or a verb.
Exactly.
He says, pardon me if this is not an English word, but it makes perfect sense. Effect of our studies in the hidden laws of nature. Since we are convinced that the degradation of India is largely due to the suffocation of her ancient spirituality, wow, every one of us would naturally be disposed to push forward a society whose proposed formation is under debate, especially if it really is meant to become a society untainted by selfish motive and whose object is the revival of ancient science and the tendency to rehabilitate our country in the world's estimation. He is so eloquent in his speech. My goodness.
So compare this with the channeled message, and it's like night and day. How anyone could think that they're actually speaking on behalf of a master, I have no idea.
Sometimes it has happened that no human power, not even the fury and force of the loftiest patriotism, has been able to bend destiny aside from its fixed course, and nations have gone out like torches dropping into water in the engulfing blackness of ruin.
Yeah.
That's Shakespearean right there.
Exactly.
Thus, we who have the sense of our country's fall, though not the power to lift her up at once, cannot do as we would, either as to general affairs or this particular one.
So he's saying our abilities are limited. We're dealing with karma, and the fall, the disappearance of the spirituality of that part of Asia weighs on their minds. One of their goals is to revive it and to bring back, to some degree, the spirituality that existed in that area 2,000, 3,000 years ago.
Without the right to meet your advances more than halfway, we are forced to say that the idea entertained by Mr. Sinnett and yourself is impracticable in part. And in part is emphasized. It is impossible for myself or any brother, or even an advanced neophyte, to be specially assigned and set apart as the guiding spirit or chief of the Anglo-Indian branch. Hence, we do not refuse to correspond with and otherwise help you in various ways. Well, that's good. But what we do refuse to do is to take any other responsibility upon ourselves than this periodical correspondence and assistance with our advice. To guide you, we will not consent. We can promise only to give you the full measure of your deserts. Deserts.
Yeah.
Deserts.
Deserts.
Wouldn't deserts have two S's?
Well, it's to deserve something.
Oh, deserts. Oh, okay. Deserve much, and we will prove honest debtors. Deserve little, and you need only expect a compensating return. This relates to what he was talking about regarding Occult.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. This is only the clumsy statement of the law of our order, and we cannot transcend it. I have asked Mr. Sinnett to draft a plan embodying your joint ideas for submission to our chiefs. Under our guidance, your branch could not live, you not being men to be guided at all in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so they've been asking for him to guide them. And he's saying, number one, we don't have the right to guide you, and number two, you wouldn't accept it. Your personality and your ego would not accept some greasy Tibetan or some dirty Singh tells you to do. So, this idea of accepting our guidance is not going to work. It's not going to work.
You ask us to teach you true science, the occult aspect of the known side of nature, and this, you think, can be easily done as asked. You do not seem to realize the tremendous difficulties in the way of imparting even the rudiments of our science to those who have been trained in the familiar methods of yours. You do not see that the more you have of the one, the less capable you are of intuitively comprehending the other, for a man can only think is his worst For a man can only think in his worn grooves, and unless he has the courage to fill up these and make new ones for himself, he must perforce travel on the old lines.
So what he's pointing out here is something that comes back into play time and again, and that is, whatever your old beliefs are, if you're not willing to get rid of those and accept something completely different, it's useless to even make an effort in that direction.
A few instances. In conformity with exact modern science, you would define but one cosmic energy and see no difference between the energy expended by the traveler who pushes aside the bush that obstructs his path and a scientific experimenter who expands an equal amount of energy in setting a pendulum in motion. We do. For we know there is a world of difference between the two. The one uselessly dissipates or scatters force, the other concentrates and stores it. This is very interesting.
So
I love how they're interweaving general conversation but also teachings at the same time. This is an occult lesson.
Yes, it is. And he's pointing out the differences between science of their time, 1880, and spiritual science, occult science. They don't look at things the same way, and they don't give the same degree of attention to things that the other does. So the example he's giving here is somebody going through the jungle and pushing a branch out of the way, and of course it flings back with the same amount of energy, but it does no work. There's no purpose to it other than to get it out of the way. And then the other one is setting a pendulum in motion. That's done with intent, and you put energy into an object that then has a function that actually does something.
I do not refer to the relative utility of the two, but only to the fact that in the one sense, there is but brute force flung out without any transmutation of that brute energy into the higher potential form of spiritual dynamics. And in the other, there is just that. The human brain is an exhaustless generator of the most refined quality of cosmic force, and the adept has made himself a center from which irradiate potentialities that beget correlations through eons to come. This is so eloquent. I think we should hear that. I think we should hear that again.
Yeah.
The human brain is an exhaustless generator of the most refined quality of cosmic force, and the adept has made himself a center from which irradiate potentialities that beget correlations through eons to come. My goodness.
So we use principles of science all the time, but for personal gain, for our comfort, for whatever reason. They use the same exact forces with a much higher aim, and that is to lift humanity and to raise the consciousness of the human kingdom. Quite a difference.
Quite a difference. This is the key to the mystery of his being able to project into and materialize in the visible world the forms that his imagination has constructed out of inert cosmic matter in the invisible world. The adept does not create anything new, but only utilizes and manipulates materials which nature has in store around him. He has but to choose the one he wants and recall it into objective existence. Would not this sound to one of your learned biologists like a madman's dream?
Now, I don't know what science's position in 1880 was as far as energy and matter. They may have thought that it was illimitable, that it could be created somehow.
This was before Einstein, so
yes,
he hasn't
exactly.
come along yet.
The Mahatmas knew at the time that it is finite. It's a finite amount. You can transmute it, you can change one to the other, but you can't create more energy, matter combined.
This is describing how the teacup was created out of nothing as well. The adept doesn't create anything new, but only utilizes and manipulates materials which nature has stored around him.
Exactly.
Choose the one he wants and recall it into objective existence. That's what HPB did with the teacup and the brooch and everything.
So he's saying science is going to consider all this pure nonsense.
Yeah, a madman's
This is
dream.
the work of a madman.
You say there are a few branches of science with which you do not possess more or less acquaintance, and that you believe you are doing a certain amount of good, having acquired the position to do this by long years of study. Doubtless you do. Let me sketch for you still more clearly the difference between the modes of physical and metaphysical sciences, the latter, as you know, being incapable of verification before mixed audiences, is classed by Mr. Tyndall with the fictions of poetry.
All right, so John Tyndall was a famous Irish physicist in the 1800s, very well respected, very famous. His points of view were a little different from most of the scientists of the day. Most of the scientists were religious people, and they were very careful to make sure that their scientific views didn't offend any religious views. Tyndall, on the other hand, believed in the work of Charles Darwin and
Alfred Wallace.
Who were the first ones to come up with the idea of evolution, that animals evolved, that plants evolved, that humans evolved. And so he was on their side of this argument. So he was advanced in his thinking.
The realistic science of fact, on the other hand, is utterly prosaic. Now, for us poor and unknown philanthropists, no fact of either of these sciences is interesting except in the degree of its potentiality of moral result and in the ratio of its usefulness to mankind. What have the laws of Faraday, Tyndall, and others to do with philanthropy in their abstract relations with humanity viewed as an integral whole?
This is the same topic that Eckhart Tolle dealt with in 1880 about the worst thing that somebody could do with a scientific invention is to shoot somebody, gunpowder. And you could shoot many people, but you couldn't kill 1,000 people or 1 million people like you can today with a nuclear bomb. So he's pointing out that there's nothing about science that is ethical or moral. It's just put out there for whoever to use for whatever purpose. Occult science is extremely careful. This is why they guard seditiously, scrupulously their secrets, because in the wrong hands they can create horrible chaos.
Cosmic energy is something eternal and incessant. Matter is indestructible, and there stand the scientific facts. Doubt them, and you are an ignoramus.
Ignoramus.
Ignoramus. An impertinent charlatan. And yet even these scientific facts never suggested any proof to the world of experimenters that nature consciously prefers that matter should be indestructible under organic rather than under inorganic forms.
Aha, so here's, the idea of entropy. And that is, scientists believe that left alone, nature will devolve.
Move towards chaos.
Right.
From order to chaos.
Move more towards chaos. Mm-hmm. Well, they completely disagree with that. They say that nature has a plan. Nature is moving in a specific direction, which is evolution of forms and evolution of consciousness. The evolution of consciousness can't occur except with the evolution of forms at the same time. You can't have the consciousness of a human in a plant. Where would it go? What could it do?
It could, but what would the purpose be of that?
It would be completely disabled
and pointless, right? Imagine, our viewers can imagine, what if you woke up tomorrow morning and you're a plant? You'd have the same awareness, but what would you be able to do with your brain and your consciousness?
Or even a cat or a dog, which is far more advanced, and yet still they're limited. A human consciousness in a dog or a cat would be interesting, but it wouldn't be very useful.
There is another interesting point, though, with that. A lot of these, what we might call lower forms, which isn't a negative describer, they're more spiritual in a way.
Yes, they are. Yeah. That's exactly
They're
right.
more spiritual. They haven't... The two arcs of evolution, like you were saying, the physical evolution and the consciousness evolution, aren't exactly parallel. They descend and rise at different places, different rates. So yes, the animals and plants may seem less able to build skyscrapers, but in a very real way, they're more spiritual, though, than we are. Most humans.
Yes, you can look at the very earliest stage of our evolution when we were nothing but a tiny spark of consciousness. We were absolutely pure. We were absolutely perfect. But what good is that tiny bit of consciousness without experience? That's the whole journey. That's the entire journey of evolution, is taking this tiny spark of consciousness and giving it the opportunity of having experience and expanding and expanding and expanding.
Another interesting way to look at this is, what if there was an advanced form, like some kind of humanoid-looking body that is evolved on Earth that could fly, could lift a mountain up, could never be hurt by anything at all, but yet there's no awareness. It's like a robot or a dead, but it's very strong and powerful. That's not good either. We need to have both. The evolution of the mind inside and the form has to evolve and adapt to the environment. Both, right? Both are necessary.
Right. Yeah. Here's what happens is that in physical form, and some of these adepts do have bodies and some do not, they can reach a certain level of consciousness, as we know, in the human body. But at some point, they grow beyond that and they stop reincarnating in physical bodies.
It limits them.
But notice that we are only fully conscious when we are awake in our body. When your body is asleep, you are not fully conscious. Look at your dreams. Can you do advanced math and write a computer program in your sleep? You may get little bits of inspiration, but you can't operate in full consciousness while you're asleep. They can. That's the difference. They have learned how to be fully conscious without the human body.
This conversation is very, very interesting. And the reason for the physical body, in addition to the other bodies that we do have, it's very interesting. Okay, inorganic forms. And that she works slowly but incessantly towards the realization of this object, the evolution of conscious life out of inert material. Hence, their scornful rejection of every phenomenon outside their own stated conditions and the very idea of the worlds of semi-intelligent, if not intellectual forces at work in hidden corners of nature. Another practical... Did you want to...
No.
Okay. Another practical illustration. Every thought of man, upon being evolved, passes into the inner world and becomes an active entity by associating itself with an elemental, with one of the semi-intelligent forces of the kingdoms. It survives as an active intelligence, a creature of the mind's begetting, for a longer or shorter period, proportionate with the original intensity of the cerebral action which generated it. That's a real fancy way to say how strong and clear is the thought. And that determines how long the thought form lasts, how much power the thought has, how much effect it has.
Now ask yourself, do you know any scientists that believe this?
They're kind of starting to, but not really.
They're starting. And this is interesting because occult science is always ahead of physical science.
By a few hundred years, right?
Oh, by thousands of years.
Yeah.
But very, very gradually, physical science adopts little by little some of these ideas.
I love that that we're getting so many nuggets now. We're receiving teachings now. They're sharing the secrets of the universe with us.
No, they're kind of getting excited. They're like, maybe we can actually get somewhere with this.
Thus, a good thought is perpetuated as an active, beneficent power, an evil one as a maleficent demon. And let's remind our viewers that we didn't mention what elementals are yet. I don't think.
We may have slightly, but an elemental is a being that we refer to them sometimes as nature spirits, elves, fairies, genes,
gnomes.
There are 1,000 different names for them in different cultures and different languages. But these are the semi-intelligent creatures that eventually will either become devas or they will become plants and animals. So they are on the astral plane and not yet physical at all.
And they give life to our thoughts.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is not something that other traditions talk about. Many traditions talk about nature spirits in ways, but not that they interact with humans in this. And it's curious how this works, and we don't have a lot of information. I'd like to learn more about it. But
I know.
When we have a thought that's very definite in nature, very clear, a very well-formed thought form, an elemental somehow latches onto it and empowers it?
Exactly.
Gives it strength?
Just as an aside, this is who mediums are having conversations with when they channel with dead people. It's not the actual person that they are channeling. It's the remnants of their astral body. And it does retain a certain amount of consciousness, but very little in comparison with the actual person.
That's why there is some communication that can happen, but it's not always like a high-level conversation because the mind is not present.
Never.
Right. I'm going to read the last sentence one more time because now that we talked about elementals, a good thought is perpetuated as an active beneficent power being assisted and propelled by an elemental. An evil thought as a maleficent demon. Man is continually peopling his current in space with a world of his own, crowded with the offspring of his fantasies, right? Desires, impulses, and passions, a current which reacts upon any sensitive organism which comes in contact with it in proportion to its dynamic intensity. The Buddhist calls this his Skandha. The Hindu gives it the name of karma. The adept evolves these shapes consciously. Other men throw them off unconsciously.
Yeah, so we're constantly having thoughts all day long. not realizing that these thoughts actually have power. They have energy. Most of them, very little, almost none whatsoever. Most of them are like a puff of smoke. They exist for a few seconds and then they dissipate. But what he's saying is most of us just kind of throw these thoughts off all day long without thinking about it. The adept is always consciously thinking about what his thoughts are. And specific ones is imbuing them with power so that they are way more powerful than the thoughts that we create.
It'd be wise to pay attention to the concept of skandhas and karma as well. Our habitual and repetitive fantasies, desires, impulses, passions that we just heard create our whole aura and our whole vibe, and that travels with us. And
that's what creates our karma.
That's what creates our circumstances in life. And it said, the master is saying, these react upon any sensitive organism which comes in contact with it in proportion to the thought's dynamic intensity. And so we affect everything around us based on our thoughts, and then we are then re-affected by the repercussions of that. So it's very important to know that. We don't want to have skandhas that are constantly causing us pain and suffering, but most people do.
Think about two different people. One is extremely negative. Nothing good ever happens to me. Goes around with this dark cloud of energy hanging around him and lashes out at people and gets angry at people because he's miserable. They may as well be miserable too. And then you've got a person who is kind-hearted, generous, who absolutely loves humanity, loves people, is always helping wherever they can, uplifting people, giving them suggestions and giving them encouragement when they're trying to accomplish something. What a difference these two people generate as far as karma.
It comes back to us. The second that we start believing that, we change.
Yeah. This is why we're studying this. We're trying to figure out how life works, and damn, these guys know what they're talking about.
The adept, to be successful and preserve his power, must dwell in solitude, and more or less within his own soul. Still less does exact science perceive that, while the building ant, the busy bee, the
nidificient
or nest-building bird accumulate as much cosmic energy in its potential form as a Haydn, or
Haydn.
In its potential form as a Haydn, a Plato, or a plowman turning his furrow. In theirs, the hunter who kills game for his pleasure or profit are wasting and scattering energy no less than the tiger who springs upon its prey. They, the hunters and the tiger, rob nature instead of enriching her, and will, in the degree of their intelligence, find themselves accountable.
Isn't that interesting?
Karma?
Yes. But what was it he said? In the degree of their intelligence will be accountable. So, in other words, a person who should know better has more karma and has more responsibility and more culpability for misusing his power. A tiger.
Now, the person who is simple-minded, if we can say that, they wouldn't have quite as much karma, but still some.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. The person who has more experience, who is more aware, has to be more careful because the karma is more intense.
Science has nothing to do with morality, virtue, philanthropy, therefore can make no claim upon our help until it blends itself with the metaphysics. Being but a cold classification of facts outside man, her domain of usefulness ceases for us at the outer boundary of these facts. and whatever the inferences and results for humanity from the materials acquired by her methods, she little cares. Therefore, as our sphere lies entirely outside hers, we distinctly refuse to be broken on any wheel of her construction.
Yeah, what does that mean?
I don't know.
He's being a little bit dark here.
Okay.
It's referring to a torture device.
Oh, goodness.
Called the breaking wheel. In the Middle Ages, it was a means of torture that invariably ended in death. So you could say also that we refuse to be crucified by science.
You take up the position that unless a proficient in arcane knowledge will waste upon your embryonic society an energy which, without moving from his place, he can usefully distribute among millions, you, with your great natural powers, will refuse to give a helping hand to humanity by beginning the work single-handed and trusting to time and the great law to reward your labor. His language is just, I'm...
Yeah. No, I wish I could speak English that well.
Wow. Of your several questions, we will first discuss the one relating to the presumed failure of the fraternity to leave any mark upon the history of the world. So he accused them of...
apparently, Hume said, well, you brothers obviously have not left your mark on the world. So he's answering, yeah, exactly. So now he's going to answer that slur that was thrown at them.
They ought, you think, to have been able, with their extraordinary advantages, to have gathered into their schools a considerable portion of the more enlightened minds of every race.
So he's being accusatory already. This is the very first letter he wrote to them, and yet he's being quite disrespectful.
Ew.
Yeah.
How do you know they have made no such mark? Are you acquainted with their efforts, successes, and failures? How could your world collect proofs of the doings of men who have sedulously kept closed every possible door of approach by which the inquisitive could spy upon them? What they have done, they know. All those outside their circle could perceive was results, the causes of which were masked from view. To account for these results, men have, in different ages, invented theories of the interposition of gods and the benign or hostile influences of the stars.
Mm-hmm.
There never was a time within or before the so-called historical period when our predecessors were not molding events and making history. Let's read that again. There never was a time within or before the so-called historical period when our predecessors were not molding events and making history.
So what he's pointing out here is, yeah, you claim that we have not left our mark on history. There's nothing to show for who you claim to be. And KH is saying otherwise. He's saying, you are completely unaware of what our work is. We work behind the scenes. And there is nothing in the history of the world that doesn't bear the mark of adepts and those who work in the hierarchy above them. That's exactly what they do.
I think it's important to emphasize that to our viewers now. That still is the case.
Exactly.
World events. And then some people might think, okay, well, what about the pandemic and what about the presidential elections and such? Well, the masters are at work. They
try to influence current events wherever they can, but they will not interfere with a person's karma, a nation's karma, an ethnic group's karma, or an organization's karma. They will not do that.
We never pretend to be able to draw nations in the mass to this or that crisis in spite of the general drift of the world's cosmic relations. The cycles must run their rounds. Periods of mental and moral light and darkness succeed each other as day does night.
Mm-hmm.
The major and minor yugas, and that's an astrological cycle, must be accomplished according to the established order of things, and we can only modify and direct some of its minor currents. If we had the powers of the imaginary personal God, and the universal and immutable laws were but toys to play with, then we might have created conditions that would have turned this earth into an Arcadia,
utopia
or heaven world, right? But having to deal with an immutable law, being ourselves its creators.
Creatures.
Oh. But having to deal with an immutable law, being ourselves its creatures, we have had to do what we could and be thankful. There have been times when a considerable portion of enlightened minds were taught in our schools. Such times there were in India, Persia, Egypt, Greece, and Rome. But, as I remarked in a letter to Mr. Sinnett, the adept is the efflorescence of his age, and comparatively few ever appear in a single century. This is very, very... This whole paragraph is so very interesting. This is very juicy.
Yes, it is. Very few appear, meaning attain that level.
Mm-hmm. And I love how he's pointing out that there's no way that any of them can direct the course of what happens in life. They can influence things. And he also says personal God. We probably want to talk about that in a moment. I'll finish the last sentence here. The boisterousness of animal passions under the stimulus of the rude energies of the lower group of etheric agents always tends to quench spirituality.
Yeah. So we will, there's actually one letter that deals specifically with this idea of a personal God, and deals with religions and deals with the evil that exists in the world. So we will get deeply into that in a future letter, one that's actually referred to as the God letter.
It does bear repeating, though, just one more time, that sentence. Okay, the master says, if we had the powers of the imaginary personal God, and the universal and immutable laws were but toys to play with, then we might have created conditions that would have turned this earth into a heaven world. Wow, but they clearly don't. Should we keep going?
They work with nature.
Yes.
In the religions believe that there is some kind of a God that creates everything and manipulates it like a toy and can do whatever he wants. He makes imaginary laws and rules. And
the three omnis.
Yes,
a God that has the three omnis.
Yeah.
He's saying
that doesn't exist. That's only in somebody's imagination.
This is very, very interesting to hear. All right, let's keep going. What else could one expect of men so nearly related to the lower kingdom from which they evolved?
A little bit of a put down here.
Also, our numbers are just now diminishing because we are of the human race.
Wow. Our numbers, meaning the adepts, the number of adepts in 1880 was going down, not increasing. And the reason for that is because once they attain that level, they don't stay there. They continue to advance too, and many of them advance beyond our realm of activity.
They may not choose to stay connected with Earth. They may go somewhere else.
Exactly. They can be of use in other parts of our solar system and eventually in other parts of our galaxy.
Also, our numbers are just now diminishing because we are of the human race, subject to its cyclic impulse and powerless to turn that back upon itself. We, who cannot stop the world from going in its destined direction, are yet able to divert some part of its energy into useful channels. Think of us as demigods, and my explanation will not satisfy you. View us as simple men, perhaps a little wiser as the result of special study, and it ought to answer your objection.
I love that statement. If you don't put too much of an expectation on us and think that we're right near the level of gods, then everything will be fine.
What's a demigod?
A
Like
demigod is
half god.
right, but they're the angels or the powers that work with God. They're his henchmen, his operatives in the world.
That's a great place to pause and end our session for today.
All right, so we're partway through this letter to A.O. Hume, and it's a long letter, but it is so important to the scope of everything that we're going to be talking about that we want to cover it thoroughly. So we will pick up there next time and finish that letter.
Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. All right.